Okay.
All right. So, all right. Can we get rid of those things on our screen? Sorry. So, all right. So just to sort of catch anyone up who hasn't been in the loop, so the MorphoSource data repository has been around for about 4 years now. And as of last year, we were funded by NSF ABI to essentially scale the project up and to integrate it into the Duke Library Data Repository System. So specifically, that was an ABI development grant, okay. The lead institution on that is Duke University. I'm the PI. We have a collaborating institution, Penn State University, and they're helping us with essentially mobilizing legacy data, and they're also going to be a test partner for networking storage at multiple institutions. Start date was September 2017. Duration is 3 years. The major goals of what is essentially a application refactor is to provide a more robust, flexible, and sustainable infrastructure for archiving 3D data. Our other major priorities at this time is to support the overt TCN, and so a lot of the activities in the last that grant came online at essentially exactly the same time as our ABI, and so a lot of our activities over the last 8 months or so have been focused on that as well. So what are those activities? We've spent some time recruiting, as one does. We now are staffed with 3 full-time developers at Duke, a data technician at Penn State, and research assistants for educational outreach at Penn State. We've been spending time organizing our new team, in particular the development team. We've designed our development workflow for tracking, submitting, and finalizing new work on the site, including use of JIRA and organizing our sprint schedule. We've been doing development on the current platform as part of our work to support our current user base and the overt TCN. This included developing new search and sort fields on the project interface to help users with large amounts of data in their projects. It included globally unique identifier updates, adding ARC IDs, and switching to a new DOI provider. We resolved our taxonomy so that we could provide a hierarchical sorting mechanism for all on the site, improve the searchability that way. We've been working on a new routine for increasing the maximum file size upload capabilities. We're just about to deploy that, but that should let us, without much trouble, accept files on the order of 20 gigabytes or more. Right now, we're limited to about 8 gigabytes over the web if you're lucky. And we're working on adding an explicit list of modality terms to the metadata, which we'll be using in the new data model to help describe data sets better. We put a lot of time into improving our data reporting. This was work done in collaboration with University of Florida and the developers at iDigBio, with a lot of feedback from the overt team and cooperation, coordination, and a lot of time spent by the overt team. It started with doing an explicit metadata mapping to Audubon Core, creating a publishing toolkit that allows specimen providers to get scan metadata on their specimens in MorphoSource and submit those records to iDigBio and GBIF for broader discoverability. We've been spending time with our new platform design, developing user stories based on feedback from overt institutions and PIs, other museums like the Field Museum and the American Museum of Natural History, and data standards working groups like the community standards for 3D data preservation group led by Adam Roundtree, Jennifer Moore, and Hannah Skates-Ketter, and the lib3d-VR working group, a collaboration between Indiana University and Virginia Tech, with one of the lead PIs being Nathan Smith. Nathan, yes, I believe that's right. Apologies if not. And then we've started new platform development. So we've set up a development environment in our preservation platform, Samvera, and we've started to spec out requirements and the data model there. So that's where we're at the stage in our project. And I think from here, I'll let Julie take it away. For those of you who don't know, Julie is the product manager of MorphoSource and the lead developer. She has a PhD in anatomical sciences from Stony Brook University, from which she graduated in 2016. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she's worked as the MorphoSource lead developer since this project start date in 2017. And without her, we would be nowhere at this point. So without more, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Doug. Yeah, so I'm really thankful for everyone being here and being willing to sort of give us their feedback as we talk about sort of MorphoSource 2.0, what our new data model is going to be. And I think it's really reasonable to sort of wonder, well, what do you mean by data model? Because there are multiple definitions that could fit there. Here, when we're talking about a data model, we mean the types of records that MorphoSource stores and how those records relate to each other, which I think another more attention-grabbing way of saying that is this presentation is a preview and a chance to sort of give feedback on what the big behind-the-scene changes are going to be in MorphoSource 2.0. I will mention user interface and sort of things like that as we go forward, but this is more behind the scenes than user interface stuff, but also how you structure your records obviously affects how people can interact with the site, what kinds of data they can store, what kind of use cases you can support. So we'll be bringing that up throughout, even if it's not our sort of the direct priority here. And I think just as important to point out is sort of why are we making these changes? It's not just arbitrary. Most of these changes are targeted at sort of feedback that we have gotten from users, from people involved in OVERT, museum curators, people saying, well, I think that there's this limitation of your current platform, and these are our solutions to solve that new approach. And so it will be very helpful from you all to hear, okay, oh, that sounds good. Maybe this won't fix this issue that I have. This doesn't fit my use case, so that we can sort of adjust these solutions accordingly. And so as to not assume too much familiarity with the current structure of MorphoSource, I'm just going to talk through our current data model. All of this stuff is slightly simplified in some ways just to sort of fit it into 10 or 15 minutes worth of slides, but still. So the core of the MorphoSource data model is media, most commonly 3D media, which anytime you see one of these boxes with text for the whole rest of this presentation, that implies that that's some kind of record with an associated metadata profile. So in this case for your media, it's a binary file, typically 3D media with associated media metadata. And most commonly, users have multiple media, and in many cases, those media are related to each other, such as maybe you scanned a chimp using a CT scanner, and you have a CT image stack and a surface scan that you've generated, and then maybe a second, further edited down surface scan. So in the current version of MorphoSource, you take those things that are related by a single scanning event, and you put them in a container known as a media group. So media groups are these containers for multiple media that all relate to one scanning event. Each media group is imaged by a single scanner. So in this case, the media group would say be imaged by a CT scanner, And then those scanners are located at facilities so that we can structure things by facilities as well. Additionally, media groups represent physical objects, most commonly biological specimens, which have sort of associated categorizing metadata like a taxonomic name. And specimens tend to belong to institutions. So these are really the core record types in the current version of MorphoSource, and all of those records are stored in a container known as a project. So if you've used MorphoSource, you have dealt with projects. Projects have members who are users, so user profile is a member of various projects, and the ownership and access of media sort of rests primarily with these projects. So your ability to access media is dependent on you being a member or an owner of projects that contain media, which has some limitations that we'll talk about moving forward. And really, in a simplified sense, this is the basic current framework of MorphoSource, and it works. More and more people are using it. I think our user base has sort of grown about twofold in the last year. The project container structure was created because it provides sort of an analogy to publishing packets. So you can create a project for a publication, and then you have a very easy link to sort of publicize and share those specimens. But there are some limitations, as we'll talk about moving forward. And so for most of the rest of my slides, I'm going to go through basically a formula where I'm going to state a question, or really it's in actual practice maybe more of a frustration from users, and with the current model, and then how we're addressing it in the new version, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. To start off with, I'm going to zoom in on media groups, because I very often get the question, what is a media group? The name is maybe slightly opaque, but I also get the deeper question, how do I represent sort of complicated relationships between media? Maybe the idea of a scanning event doesn't cut it. How do I represent, when things are derived from other things? And so the biggest change for actually how we're doing this in the new site is media groups are going away. There will be no thing called a media group anymore. Instead, individual media will now have more flexible, more nuanced relationships with other media. So just as an example, if you have a media that is a CT stack, and then you have a surface scan that you have created from that CT stack, you will explicitly specify that the surface scan is derived from the CT scan. Or to state that the other way, the CT scan is the parent of the surface scan, which this is something you can do in the current site, but we're going to more forefront this and sort of use this to take on some of the roles that the media group currently has. In addition to these very sort of specific parent-child relationships, media will also be able to be just generically associated with other media. And one of the biggest uses for that is that if you currently have media in a media group where you haven't specified that this is like media A is derived from media B, if you have not specified that, but they are in a media group, in the new version of the site, they're going to get associated with links. So we can still show all the same links that the media group does, just in a more explicit way and without needing this sort of possibly slightly opaque category of records. By opening up these relationships, we also enable people to archive multimodal media. What I mean by that is if you take a photogrammetry scan and a laser scan and you combine those, such as maybe say you're working on a 3D model of an archaeological site, in this one way you could represent that now is just by having media in MorphoSource with two parent media. So that sort of enables us to begin accounting for that. And in fact, my next slide, if I have multimodal images, how do I archive those in a strong way with sort of associated modality-specific metadata? Well, there are two ways in the new model. One, like I said, you can, if both of the parent media, 2, 3, 4, however many, if those are all in MorphoSource, you can just identify those as parents to, the composite media. But also, if those parents aren't on MorphoSource, and see, if you have multiple parents, then you'll get that sort of facility scanner metadata per parent. But also, if the parents aren't on MorphoSource, you can actually directly associate one media record with multiple scanners. And also something that we don't currently do, but we'll be doing, that media are going to have scanner modality specific metadata. So the metadata for a media file is going to differ if it's from a CT stack versus a laser scanner. That for your CT stack, you'll have some voxel resolution fields. For a laser scanner, you may have laser scan resolution fields. So that's going to change. Basically, as you can see, we're just trying to open up these relationships to allow sort of different 3D data use cases, so that people whose data don't quite fit into the current system can fit into the new system. All right. So another question we often get is, how do I see all the media that I own or can edit? And this also starts to dovetail into some limitations that people feel with projects. Because say, for instance, if I'm a museum curator and my collection in this museum, if we've started to upload specimens to MorphoSource, and so we've created a project for our museum collection, but then we realize that there are other people, researchers, who have created publication projects, and those publication projects have specimens from my museum. What do I do as a museum curator? How do I get all of my institution's data in one place? Which that also even applies for a researcher. If you have 3 publication packets or you have 3 projects, how do I see the media from all of those? So the biggest change for that is actually, rather than projects owning media, projects containing media and the access rights flowing through those, users are going to own media. So as a user, you will have a list of media that you own and a list of media that you can edit, and probably also some that you can see. And you will have just a very clear list of, okay, these are my media. But of course, if you're a museum curator, that doesn't totally solve the problem, because you don't want to just have that rest with a single user. And we are solving that through introducing the concept of organization profiles, which organization profiles are like user profiles. So an organization can own media, can have access to edit media, but an organization is a grouping of users, basically. And for the most part, those organizations are going to represent an institution. The reason why we still have organizations and institutions is because not all institutions will have users on the site representing them. So you may have a museum where there are no users on the site that are affiliated with that institution. So those media are still associated, the specimens are still associated with the institution, but if a user joins and have control over that institution's media, then they will form a user group known as this organization. And organizations own media just like users. Yeah.
Someone has turned on their microphone inadvertently. Can you please check your microphones and turn them off? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just ask a brief question, or should I wait to the end? Just a brief thought here. Is organization different from team? Seems like a team to me.
It is.
But maybe I'm not seeing something.
You could use an organization in this context to represent your team. So you could use an organization to represent a lab group. You could use it to represent a collaboration if that collaboration sort of owns media collectively. It's just that organizations can be associated with institutions. So say there could be an organization for the Boyer Lab Group, but there could also be an organization for the American Museum of Natural History. And the difference is that the AM&H organization is going to be linked to the AM&H institution record. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I was just kind of, trying to picture in my mind what who would call themselves an organization.
But that raised a new question for me, which was that then an organization can only be part of one institution. So if you were a team, like a grant project, what happens then? Like if you had a group of users that represent multiple institutions controlling data for something, what then?
That's a great question. I believe my answer for that is that if you had an overt organization and say you wanted, and there was also a University of Florida institution, it depends on how you want to handle it. You could have a University of Florida organization and an overt organization, where the overt organization doesn't represent the University of Florida directly, so it's not directly connected to that institution, but they could both have edit access to media. Now, there'll be somewhere where the buck stops. There'll be like this is the person who owns this most principally, which probably depends on what museum curators want to do with their data. But all right, and then I think this is a great conversation. If we have other thoughts, let's maybe save it till the end of the meeting.
I'll make one other point. I think that as Julie goes forward, you'll see that we're thinking of actually even a third way to extend edit access to a group of users, and that might be a more appropriate way of, for instance, organizing an overt group. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. And just one last thing about users and organizations. I just want to point out that, both users and organizations in this scheme, they're very similar. They both own media. They can both, share media. They can grant media access. And also in the user interface, which this is a bit different than how it is now, both users and organizations will have public profile pages where you can basically see a list of all published media that is owned by that user or that organization. And in fact, just to sort of delve a little further into the user interface, we're going to be making it easier to see media or published media that are sorted by all kinds of other record types. And many of these types of sorting are in the current site, but they're not all maybe necessarily easy to find. But we're going to make it easier to sort media by media that are related to that media, by the user, organization, or institution associated with that, by the specimen, by the facility or the scanner. Basically, we're trying to support the idea of lots of different pathways to reach the same data, which the current site does, but we're going to try and do it better. All right, and then this is actually, I think, my last sort of question-answer format. I think we get a lot of questions about, well, what is a project for? What do I use a project for? And how do I have media in multiple projects? Which this relates again to that museum curator use case I specified. If scans are associated with a publication, then it may be difficult. Museums not really entirely sure what to do with that media to try and make it discoverable. So projects as containers, as an idea, are largely going away. They are going to be replaced with the idea of projects as tags. There are going to be different tag types for different kinds of projects, so publications, lesson plans. But the thing is, there are still, so projects, the way we created them, initially served two use cases, and we can't really get away with that. And one use case is to label things for discoverability. So say if you have 3 media, maybe someone wants to be able to take all the fossils from Swartkrans on the entire site. They just want to give that label so that people can find fossils from Swartkrans. And we're solving that through the idea of these public tags, which a public tag is going to have one owner, but then anyone in the site can actually apply that tag. So, people, okay, well, here's a fossil from Swartkrans, so you can sort of crowdsource the best list. This listing of media would be viewable by all, and the user who makes the tag doesn't even need to own the media. So people will be able to sort of tag things in an ad hoc fashion, and that's sort of one of the user needs for sort of projects or tags, is being able to label things. But the other is, how do you group things for batch editing or for granting edit access, which we're going to do that through the idea of something similar to a private tag. Like our example private tag is maybe someone wants to sort of group media for a publication in press. And so because it's in press, they don't necessarily want it to be open. But in this case, in your private tag, you have a user who owns that tag, but you can also add members to the tag. You know, it's private, so only owners or members can actually see that group of media. And because of how the owner sets it up, this private tag, when they add media to it, will also grant edit access to all of the other users who are members of that tag. And I want to say, we're still working on this. I don't know, we may end up coming up with sort of two separate labels for public tags versus private tags or something like that, because there's some complication here when it comes to trying to serve these two distinct user needs of labeling versus sort of a collaboration space. But so that's sort of where we're going with that. And just to sum up, I'm going to sort of redo the first slide I gave. I'm going to sort of build this 2.0 data model, which hopefully is more flexible, solves more user cases. So I'm only listing 2 media here rather than 3, just for screen real estate. And just as a quick point, some arrows will only connect to one of these media or the other. That doesn't mean anything. It's just any arrow coming off of one of these media could come off of the other. It's schematic. It's for simplification. So these media can have sort of relationships between each other and other media. So you can have parent-child relationships, can be associated with, and you can have multiple of those relationships all over the place. Media can be imaged by one or more scanners, where each scanner is going to be associated with one or more modalities. So you can even have an explicit scanner that is, say, a micro CT/MRI machine. But each scanner is still going to be housed at a facility. Media will still represent specimens or physical objects plus taxonomies. And we do have some thoughts about how we're going to change the editability of specimen records and taxonomy records. I just haven't had time to bring it up today. Each specimen or physical object still belongs to an institution. Media, again, instead of being grouped in projects, media are now directly owned by or editable by users, and of course by organizations, which organizations are groups of users which can be associated with, groups of users which don't have to, but can represent institutions. And then, instead of going in project containers, there will be project tags where media can be tagged by multiple projects, and those project tags themselves will be owned by or editable by users or organizations. And that's really it for me. So this is the point. For the rest of the meeting, we would really like to solicit questions, comments, further feedback. I really liked the discussion we were starting to get about organization. And we can go through the examples, but I really think maybe it's best to just open the floor to if anyone has sort of thoughts, further comments. So what do you all think? You can either turn your mic on or chat or whatever.
A question about the project tags for public tags.
Yeah.
Once you make them public, it sounds like anybody can edit and apply that tag. But if you have a public tag that shows a data related to a paper you're publishing, you don't want other people to like willy-nilly add that tag. Is there going to be a restriction there?
Yeah, and possibly the use of public versus private tags is a bit of a misnomer there, because I think if you want to have a locked down tag, like a tag for your publication, even if you private tag or say a project tag, you could still make that visible. You could make that public, but it's just that it's only a label that you or people that you nominate could apply to specimens. Like I said, that's still something we're thinking through, especially the naming and such. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Of course, it's probably worth stating that because we have the public tags, there wouldn't really be anything preventing someone from creating a public tag that was, one character off from the quote-unquote private tag and associating more media with it.
This is true, and I mean we already do active curation of the data, it's sort of, I think one of the things that differentiates MorphoSource from some repositories is we're really trying to leverage crowdsourcing, which also sort of necessitates some amount of faith in the user base, but we'll also be doing active curation, for things like that.
I think it's great, Dave. Ed and I high-fived each other when you got to the tag part. We were excited.
I saw it. Almost made me laugh.
So I think that's great. One of the questions is, will you implement something just for sort of helping tag consistency of like autocomplete of, from the set of tags, so that there's some attempt at consistency instead of having, plurals and things like that? I mean, that'll be...
Absolutely. I think something similar. Something similar to how a lot of sites do it, like Twitter does this, where once you begin typing in a tag, that it auto completes the tag. I think that's definitely going to be part of our design eventually.
The other thing I was going to ask was about, will you? One thing that sort of was absent from your data model was funding attributions. And how are you going to handle that via tags, or is that going to be some other? Because I think that's going to be a really important, obviously for Overt, but also for many other projects, a really important thing of being able to retrieve all those media associated with a given funding source. I think is going to be useful for particular grants, but also even particular, like for your own reporting to the National Science Foundation, it would be useful to know as well, right?
Absolutely. I think the solution here is, I'm trying to think how to describe it, because it really just depends on how you come down to describe things. Because we could either say, either, fields like funding attribution will essentially become tags that are automatically applied. Or another way of saying that is that, we're definitely going to have sort of strong faceted search for individual sort of funding attribution.
Yeah, I think that's more of a sort of a metadata question than a data model question. I think that's something we still have to resolve, and something that I think will be sort of will be a work in progress for longer than the data model itself. But yeah, I could see it making sense to have a funding field at the level of media files, as well as for any given tag. So
I imagine there'll also be some discussions about this sort of universe of tags, and then how that actually is translated into, say, the actual Audubon core fields that then get published through the RSS feed, right? Because you don't want necessarily that whole universe of cloud somehow getting shoved into one column of that CSV file.
This is true, and this is why, certain aspects of metadata will likely sort of become auto tags, or certain aspects of metadata will be auto treated as tags. Like, for instance, this is like a very rigorously defined thing. Taxonomic names can be essentially treated or considered as tags, because you'll be able to do search by taxonomic name. You'll be able to access a page for each taxonomic name where you can see all of the media associated with that across the whole site. So tags won't just be sort of willy-nilly free text. They'll also fit into categories. But you're right, there's going to need to be a lot of thought about the Audubon core mapping, especially because it would be easier to do the Audubon core mapping if things like IPTs supported repeated fields. But I don't want to get too far off the beaten path here with that.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
This is Sharon at the Field Museum. We finally got audio and stuff. I just want to say we did lots of high-fiving and stuff as well when we saw what was coming down. So thank you so much for doing that. I had some thoughts about the tags. Tags sound really exciting. And I was wondering if, perhaps as part of the model, if when a project is created, I know we're kind of moving away from projects, but if you associate tags with a project, that means that the people who create or own the project or institution, they control the tags that get created. Those tags can then be associated with media that are part of, you can have an institution tags, you could have project code tags, you could have user and role tags. Those then are created and set up. You have less of a risk of things being created with spelling mistakes because it's the person responsible for that organization or institution.
Mm-hmm.
And then you release those tags that can be then associated with the media. Just kind of a thought. We were scribbling stuff on our whiteboard.
Yeah, could you go into a little more detail of what you're thinking about here? Because that sounds really interesting.
So it was when you were talking about, actually, could you put your slide back up
Yeah.
from the very beginning with the
From the very beginning?
Yeah, go back, put the project tags back on.
This one?
I think is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we want to be able to associate metadata with the media that are associated with projects and institutions and organizations, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have, for example, an organization record.
Right.
Somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So when that organization record is set up, if the person responsible for setting it up creates a set of metadata tags, so
Yeah.
like the name, and then those tags can be released for people to use them when they upload media. So now you can, do you see what I mean? See where I'm going?
Uh-huh.
I do. You could then have a project record with tags, and the tag would be, say, for overt, the project code would be overt, and then it has institution tags, which have come from the different institutions that are part of overt. Do you see what I mean? So the overt project piece wouldn't create the Field Museum tag. They would just use our tag for their project and their media. Do you see?
Yes.
Just a little thing that kind of popped into my head as you were kind of going through stuff.
No, I think that's great, and I think I'm not sure if this is nitpicky, but I'm not sure if in the end if it would be tagged so much as associating records. But I do like the idea that if the overt organization can associate itself with associated institutions and basically, like you said, like tag institutions. And I do also something that I want to be part of this is the ability for someone like in an organization to set up tags and then to release those to other users so that other people can use them, because like that might even be the best way to do something like an overt tag is in that sense. But I think that's good, but it's also it's sort of this complexity of tags.
It's a great idea. We'll have to think about it and digest it. Actually, if you could send in writing some of those ideas, Sharon, that would also help us review it and think about it some more.
Could I?
Absolutely. We have a whiteboard. We'll take a screenshot.
So another thing that Ed just brought up that relates directly to this is, would it be possible to have explicit stated relationships among tags? Because, for instance, if we had, just as an example, NSF as a tag, overt as a child of NSF, and then all the grants are actually all children of overt, you'd then be able to get a lot more power and potentially flexibility out of your tags by having relationships among tags.
Tagging tags, essentially.
Yeah, or sort of tag hierarchies, which again, I feel like this is one of these, this is going to be a great question to think about in terms of, because really what that is that's almost like metadata modeling. It's how do we, because right now we model the metadata for grant attributions as a simple text field, but we could absolutely model the metadata for grant attributions hierarchically, so that you have to select a funding body, or some other sort of wider.
There's anatomical tags as well.
Yeah, so this is the setup for using anatomy ontologies is the same thinking, right? So I mean. Yeah. Thinking about hierarchies of tags or ontologies of tags would be useful probably in the long run.
Be extremely useful. Just to chime in here, and thanks, Dave, for bringing that up. I was kind of having that on my mind to volunteer. So glad you're beating me to the punch here, and I would fully support that. That'd be a very interesting capability to have in MorphoSource to use. Query expansion in intelligent ways.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we can talk about some of that tomorrow, Elmar. implementing how we want to go about, having intelligent queries and ontologies. And,
yeah.
I think the nice thing about going this way with sort of tagging is you're letting the data make its own relationships rather than hard coding relationships into your data model. So you keep that. That makes it much more flexible down the line. So for example, with the funding example, if you were to use users and roles instead of parties and roles, those are now tags that you can attach rather than having to build a specific relationship into your data model that says, here is the attachment to the funder. So it's kind of exciting to do it this way.
Yeah, it is. And you just saying that really sort of, I think, it really hit me, what the power could be of even just in a very generic sense, being able to specify parents to tags, generally speaking.
It speeds up data entry too. So, you pick a parent or you pick a child and you get all of its parents and grandparents with it. So
yeah,
it's powerful.
And I want to say that's also sort of turning away from tags and back to sort of media and multimodal media and sort of these parent-child relationships between media. We're hoping to make sort of the process of filling in metadata from media much faster, because when you have a model that's derived from, say, a CT image stack and you nominate that as the parent, a lot of that metadata was basically going to flow downhill in that sense for sort of the original modality, the original scanner, sort of just trying to autofill as much of that data as we can based on the relationships that users specify. Just a side thing.
Moving towards this flexibility of tags and potentially even hierarchies of tags, I hope that the search capabilities then will actually be able to search that diversity of tags. Will that be true?
I mean, yes, we're going to have to sort of tightly integrate, just generally speaking, we're going to have to tightly integrate tags with the search and sort of allow people to sort of search by tag type even rather than just by tags. And if we do start, and I think this is something that we're really going to have to be continually thinking about, and I think this is great feedback, if we start sort of thinking about tag hierarchy, then we're also going to figure out how that intersects with search. How does your search traverse up and down that hierarchy?
I think keep it a little simpler than that. If your tags are created and associated with the different record types, then your search becomes more of an index search. So instead of searching specific fields, what you do on the back end is create an index of the fields that need to be searched, and then it becomes a keyword search.
Yeah.
We do a bunch of stuff like that. So then you're not tied to the user having to know which field to search in to find the thing that they need to search.
Certainly. Absolutely. I mean, and that's how our current search does, in that we index many different metadata fields, and then sort of use those as a generalized keyword search.
Yeah, because people kind of expect that now. That's the joy and the pain of Google, right?
Right. But
would you be able to set up some faceted querying that, for instance, since we have the IDIC bio integration and you have localities now for many things, I mean, would you be able to set up some querying for skulls of marsupials from South America?
I mean, yes, that is possible, and I would very much like to make that sort of thing happen. It's sort of, I will admit, I think the structure of search is one of our upcoming conversations rather than something that we've had a lot of conversations about to this point. But I do agree that that's a very helpful use case.
There's a lot of actually exciting potential for leveraging external data providers to improve the searchability of the site. One set of discussions we've been having and a potential collaboration going forward is to leverage the ePanda API to also not only allow geographic searches but also temporal searches and more.
So just sort of stepping away from this, Jesse Maisano, says, most of this discussion is geared towards contributors. For users, one complaint I've heard is the lack of preview for data sets. That is, if it's a CT data set, the user may not know until they've downloaded a scan of the skull or the back of the skull is missing, and that it's not useful for their needs. I absolutely agree, and that is an issue. And so, yeah, so not so much what we've been talking about here, but part of our priority list for the new site, I think really part of its core functionality is going to be a volume stack image viewer, just to really help sort of deal with that, is just so that you can actually preview, probably not all the images in a CT stack, but a subset of images in a CT stack, so you can get an impression of if the back of the skull is there. And we're sort of really working on exploring resources for improving our viewer in general. Sort of, we'd like to integrate it more tightly with like the IIIF sort of universal viewer, handling something I think that will hopefully even end up on the current platform is sort of colored textures on surface models. But it's so yeah, improving the viewing capabilities is a big thing for us.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it's one of those things that we can do just by improving tools on our end.
That volume thing will be awesome.
We've had some discussions with people who have done similar things in a more constrained framework, and so it's definitely possible and it's not that difficult to do. So it's just a matter of getting it to the top of the priority list, and it definitely is a priority in this grant cycle. So there's no doubt that we'll have those. And I would like to say, there's a lot in some of these discussions we've been having about data discoverability that usually focuses on sort of the terms that are associated with data. But the way I think about it is that visual preview is one of the most important pieces of metadata for discoverability that there is, because people really do rely on that to decide whether those data are interesting or useful to them.
Which, I don't know, Doug, if you want to. Yeah, so Rebecca Snyder just mentioned that for a later discussion that she'd be interested in hearing more about the preservation aspect and what the plans are for the models and the new data model once you join the Duke Library Systems. I think maybe I can give part of an answer to this. Maybe I'll let Doug address the rest. In terms of preservation stuff, for what it's worth, the Samvera Fedora stack that we are working on does have some limited fixity file integrity checking, but also one of the ways that we are already sort of integrated with Duke Library Systems is we're working basically on the same technology stack. We're sharing a lot of the same tools and expertise, and they've also developed tools and are developing more tools for sort of stronger fixity checks and sort of better file integration stuff. Which I don't know if you have other things in terms of file preservation.
I think that's kind of sums it up in terms of, unless you have more specific questions about where we're at with that. Yeah, we're using Fedora. We're using it to do object or storage node management and to compare asynchronous copies of the data. We're using a routine built in-house called File Tracker, and then managing those nodes with another routine called rsync. There are some questions that are on the horizon that we're going to be addressing, which is whether we might move to an object store rather than a file system, and so those are sort of ongoing discussions that we're having with central IT and the libraries.
Yeah.
I was just thinking more, yes, obviously the technology aspect of monitoring the health of the file, but also like the metadata, where does that stored, what's the retention rate, are you doing an audit file, are you keeping track of edits and new tags as they come up? And this is probably getting too deep into the weeds off to the side, so we can chit-chat about it later, but...
So that we haven't finalized anything there. So actually, it would be great to talk with you a little bit about that later, I think, because these are some questions that I think we would probably bring back to the DevOps people and metadata DevOps people at in our library digital repository, and also the senior director of IT at Duke. And try to make some decisions there.
My video's not on, but I'm shaking my head yes.
Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll be in touch with you after the meeting.
Yeah, sounds great.
Got kind of a lower level question back to the data model that you're going with in terms of a capture device being associated with a facility all the time. Is that how does that work if you're doing capture in the field, or if it's not like not a facility-based scan?
I mean, I would say it's maybe who owns the scanner in that case.
Okay.
That's how we treat it right now. I think it's important to add that provenance at some level or another, either a user as a facility or as an institutional facility.
Yeah, and that is probably, we should probably have stronger links between facilities and institutions.
Yeah.
To help structure the metadata.
Ed has a question.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Hey.
I was wondering if you are still considering using the proprietary files, storing proprietary files online, or if that's something that you're not doing. Because currently you have a list of, when you're signing up for the MorphoSource, you have a list of preferred, reconstruction softwares and things like that. Is there any plans, ideas about storing the BGL files or the Aviso groups or whatever on that?
So, and I know we've had sort of conversations about this before. I think we have a general preference for open file formats, because I realize that some of the things, like some of the proprietary tools, provide very convenient packages for storing, very usable data. But our concern is about sort of the preservation long term of those things, and also for our ability. So if we're going to do things like, if we want to improve imaging, like previews on the website, having open file formats, in some cases, those are going to be the only ways that we can really work with them on our server. Because, we need to be able to build sort of automated tools to work with that. I think that currently in some cases, our compromise solution is if someone can upload, say, the open files, if they then also want to include some, proprietary display purpose things. I think we talked about this in the past, and maybe that's a way to talk about it.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything preventing you from including a BGL file with a stack. I think the concern, I think that the main concern I have at this point is because we can't guarantee access to those proprietary formats, even if they're viewable with currently supported freeware. I'm concerned about hosting large footprint proprietary files. If it's just a small, 10, 20 kilobyte file that a BG reader can interpret, use to interpret a stack and labels, then I think that's fine. But yeah, that's kind of our concern.
Yeah, I think maybe a good way of stating a general perspective here is that we don't want to prevent people from sharing these kind of files. So it's good to allow options, but that we need the core of the open file formats present so that we know that we can preserve those long term, and also so that we know that we can easily have tools that may need us to sort of interact with those files on the server side?
I think it makes great sense. I think the question is that, you know, if we're publishing a paper on something, like we already have prepared all of that segmentation through the VGL file, so we'd love to share it. So I mean, ultimately, it probably means that we're then storing the data related to those three-dimensional images in more than one place, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a submat file then in the journal. And I guess that's okay. It's sort of subpar from the point of view of archiving it somewhere. But I mean, I think that's kind of what comes out of our concerns of that. It's just, you know, then we have to put on a website. I mean, there's a whole other place that we could host it, but we could do it in one place.
Right, and I totally get the wanting to be able to have everything in one place. I mean, that totally makes sense. I think.
That's all right. I mean, I understand your concerns about it. I'm not worried about that. But it's worth thinking of because this is going to come up in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I guess how do other people feel about? I mean, we're taking a pretty hard line about proprietary data, I would say. So, I mean, do other people on the call think that that's reasonable? Or, I mean, I think we stated our case for why, but I mean, Rebecca says nothing is going to cover everyone's situation, but it would be.
I think that's for a separate tangential conversation about rights ownership, which we should get back to. Yeah. But yeah, I would be interested. Do other people have thoughts about sort of proprietary versus open, you know, some of these file formats? Does it seem like we are being inflexible here? Because it's, you know, we want to support the needs of the community.
So if I can just chime in here briefly, I'm one of the co-founders from many years of the Dryad digital data repository for data, you know, accompanying published scientific articles. So I agree that the case for open formats is a very strong one because that's essentially the only, you know, if preservation is a major goal of the undertaking, then only open formats are gonna guarantee the ability to preserve them for later use, right? Mm-hmm. Having said that, the ability to archive something in comparison to nothing is also preferable, right? So if a proprietary format is all you got, then maybe it's better to archive that than to archive nothing. And
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think many of the scan formats can be exported as open formats, so that would be a general recommendation. But for things that are essentially fundamentally proprietary, I mean, what we recommended in the past is that researchers use, and this is primarily a researcher issue as opposed to an institutional issue so far anyway, is that they would use something like Data Dryad or Figshare or Zenodo or some other repository that has made it part of its mission to, you know, accept anything for the sake of you know, that argument that it's better to archive something than nothing. And you know, I think what that suggests is maybe we do a better job of linking to associated data sets that are not intrinsic to MorphoSource, but maybe are hosted by a different.
Yeah, maybe one point that's worth you know, keeping in mind that may not be immediately obvious, but I think it matters to clearly work with a policy and terms for reuse, right? So one thing, so it doesn't come to the case that the owner of a data set in the repository also dictates what can and cannot be done with it, right? So, you know, just as a practical example, there have been people who have archived programming source code on Dryad in the form of PDF documents, right? And you're not very reusable, right? So, you know, Dryad allows, and we have exploited that we went ahead and extracted the text from the PDF and redeposit it as a TXT file, right? And there's, you know, the author isn't in a position to prevent that. And I think that's very important.
So essentially we could think about normalization tools. That is, we could pick some proprietary formats to support in the meantime, assuming there was tools to read those data and sort of re-export them as different formats.
Yeah.
That'd be one way to help. I think one issue is that I don't some of these formats that I know Ed and Dave are thinking about, I don't actually know of an open source version. Now it may be that there is some equivalence in the X3D sort of ecosystem of file formats or capabilities, but that's something we need to look into. I mean, it's definitely something we need to look into, because there are open source equivalents of label fields and Aviso and VG Studio Max. These are programs that people use to work with CT data, and those are things that we should really get on board with.
I agree. And I want to actually just make one tangential comment, because there's been a pretty great conversation in the chat about sort of ownership and rights, and Gary's been making some great points about, the person who uploads versus the person who has rights, or the person who, holds the IP rights but may not be the owner. And there are a couple of things that I just want to briefly touch on in relation to that. One, that when I've used the term ownership in this presentation, I wasn't talking about ownership in the sense of legal or copyright or IP ownership. I'm thinking of ownership from like a technical perspective of who has control over sort of the place where the buck stops in terms of user access rights, which in many cases will not be the same as the ultimate copyright holder. And so there's a distinction between those two things. But we're working, one of the things we want to be able to do is for organizations, say museums, to be sort of the ultimate arbiter of where the access rights rest for their media. So if a museum wants to essentially be the ultimate owner for every media that's uploaded to MorphoSource from their collection, that's something that we're going to support. And also, we're also going to support proxy upload. So, it'll be possible to have someone in your lab upload media that is then owned by, say, the PI's user account, or say have a researcher upload media that will be owned by an organization's profile. So we're going to support some of these things.
I mean, discussions about where the IP or copyright ownership resides was one of the motivations for really thinking carefully about recalibrating with organizational user groups, because it looks to us like in many cases it is going to be, as things go forward, the museum collections and institutional collections that regardless of who creates the data, are going to be the copyright holders, or if not copyright holders, then at least the owners in an IP sense of the data. Where am I going? I want to respond to Gary.
Yeah. Which, so it's about 12:10. So I know a lot of people have to run. I just want to thank everyone again for. I want to thank everyone again for your contributions, and hopefully we're going to continue having a lot of these discussions. If any of you are going to be in Berkeley at the iDigBio conference next week, I'll be there, and I'd be happy to sort of continue some of these chats there. So.
Yes.
All right. So I think we're good. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks.
We may be sending a follow-up with essentially a short kind of survey-ish list of questions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, feel free to solicit feedback, anything you didn't get to mention to me or Julie directly. That'd be really helpful.
And like similarly, Jesse, your comment there, I think that's a great thing to think about and something we need to consider. All right. Okay. Bye, everyone.